Well, okay, let me go back to another thing, George, you brought up, and the question was, does the Genesis account have to be historical or not? Does it have to be
Right.
interpreted that way? So, Dick, would you say that the Genesis text must be interpreted that way, or would you say it would be okay to interpret it metaphorically?
Well, I do, but then that's because I've compiled enough data and evidence that shows it looks to be genuine history. As again, it's not human history, as we've commonly misbelieved. It appears to be the history of those particular people.
Mm.
But even they, I don't believe, thought that they were alone in the world. I mean, the Akkadians go back to 4000 BC, and the Akkadians are Adamites before the flood and Semites after the flood. And they were already in the company of the Sumerians, so they had to know there was other people in the world. It wasn't that they thought that they were alone, or that they thought that all people originated from Adam. There's evidence that he was a real live person, and that's what I've been trying to convey in my book.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think for 1 minute that they thought that they were alone. I don't think that they intended for us to believe it. But because the book was for them, there was no reason to start anyplace else.
So Dick, would you say that that Genesis should be considered as real history, like these people are history, the genealogies represent real people, and if somebody doesn't take it that way, a Christian doesn't take it that way, then they're really misunderstanding a lot of Scripture and what Scripture is trying to tell somebody?
Oh, I think they're misunderstanding, yes, but as far as it being a litmus test
No.
for whether you're a good Christian or not, no, I don't.
But what about as far as like missing the big picture or missing a lot of key points? If it's really true that those are real genealogies and real people, and somebody's not taking it that way, then they aren't they? Are they? Is there a big chunk of theology and stuff they're being wrong about?
Well, I'll give you a quick example. Cain built a city he named Enoch after his son. Well, the Sumerians called that city Unug. The city that was Nimrod's city, Erech, the Sumerians called Uruk, which today we call Iraq. So these cities were known about. These people were known about. Even Adam was known. There's a couple of pyramids carved in Egypt around 2400 BC to talk about a primal creation out of the waters of chaos. And the one who was created was called Atum. And he begot, and there's a number of names on the list. One of them is Seth, Adam's third son. Well, how many created individuals do we know of anyway? And so I think that it's pointing to the individual that we know as Adam. But we just misunderstood and thought that somehow he was the progenitor of all mankind, and that of course.
Okay, George. So how would you answer that question about the history of Genesis? I mean, if you're going to take it metaphorically,
well, I mean, I don't want to just use the term metaphor. I think there are different kinds of text. I think, to be very well. First of all, let me point out we've kind of been focusing on the second creation story, Genesis 2, and you've also got the first creation story, which in some important ways is quite different from the second one. Now, some people are going to say, well, you're saying the Bible is contradicting itself. It is, only if you insist on trying to force both of those into the mold of historical or scientific narratives. If you understand that they're different kinds of text, that the first text is really a kind of liturgy, celebrating the sovereignty of God and the creation of the universe and humanity. The second text is, kind of a more down-to-earth picture of God. It's more just in story, right, simple story form. God getting down in the dirt and creating Adam. They're different kinds of texts. They're both true. They both say profoundly true things about God and God's relationship with the world and humanity. But that doesn't mean they're historical. Now, I would go on to say, I think in the early chapters of Genesis, there are probably some historical details that are used there. Some of the names of places and so forth, names of people, yeah, they may well be historical individuals. But that's a very different thing from saying that you have historical narrative there. The fact that the biblical writers may have used some of these ancient traditions and names and so forth doesn't mean that they were writing history in the modern sense.
Okay, yeah, and there's 100 questions about, that would be follow-on questions, but we're just trying to get a big picture here about, like for example, I consider myself an evangelical Christian, and I think with evangelical Christians, the movement's kind of saturated with young Earth creationists, and they take it literally. So, George, what you're saying is kind of really, and actually Dick too. I mean, both of you just accepting evolution is a big shocker right there. So, any of my friends at church who hear this would be shocked, to even consider evolution. So, this is just kind of an icebreaker discussion anyway. So, let's move on to the third part. Is there anything you want to say to finish this up before we move on to the third part?
I think we both set out our positions.
Well, I think we have areas of agreement and disagreement, as George and I have had over the years, and that would be expected. But as to whether Genesis has historical integrity or not depends on whether you believe that Adam was an historical figure or not. And I think there's enough evidence that shows that he was. His name perpetuated as Adamu throughout the Akkadian community. There was an Assyrian king named Adamu. There was a governor, a Canaanite governor named Adamu. So, and when you drop the U in Akkadian in Hebrew, it's just Adam. So I believe that. Go ahead.
I am not a philologist. My father, however, was. My father was trained in classical philology. And I can remember, when we get into these discussions around the dining room table and about different languages and so forth, and, he'd say, well, this word in English must be related to this word in German or something. And my father's sort of, rather scornful rejection of false etymologies based on just the way the words sound. And you've got to be really careful about that, of saying, well, this word in one language sounds like a word in another language.
Well, Akkadian
not always true.
Akkadian is a precursor to Hebrew. It's not
well, yeah, I know. I mean, they're related, but even at that, you've got to be careful.
Well, it's, for example, John, Juan, and Johann.
Sure.
And they all go back to their different languages, but they all go back to one common individual.
Sure. Yeah.
So some may be related, but just be careful because something may look on the surface as related, it may not be.